Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, featuring stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life stories for present-day listeners and for generations to come. Our entire collection is available on the website voicesofoklahoma.com. Subscribe to be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. Here's another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com. Howard Barnett began his career in 1975 as a business lawyer in Tulsa, specializing in securities offerings and corporate transactions, primarily for the growing number of entrepreneurial oil and gas companies. In 1985, he joined Tribune Swab-Fox Companies Incorporated as its executive vice president and COO of its daily newspaper subsidiary, Tulsa Tribune Company. He eventually became chairman and CEO of the parent company. Barnett entered state government in 1998 as Secretary of Commerce for Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating and as the director of the Oklahoma Department of Commerce. In 1999, he became Governor Keating's chief of staff, serving until the end of Keating's term in January 2003. He was named OSU-Tulsa president in 2009 and became President Emeritus in 2019. In Howard's oral history interview, he talks about the closing of the Tulsa Tribune, his work in state government, and his work in Tulsa's new form of city government on the Oral History Podcast and website, voicesofoklahoma.com.
Well, my name is John Erling, and today's date is February 5th, 2025. So, Howard, would you state your full name, please?
Howard Gentry Barnett, Jr.
And we are recording this in the facilities of voicesofoklahoma.com here in Tulsa. Your birth date?
June 10th, 1950.
And your present age?
74.
And where were you born?
Kansas City, Missouri.
Now, there's a story about your birth. Why don't you tell us that?
Well, I was, as I said, born in Kansas City. I was adopted at birth, and my parents flew up to Kansas City. I was a week or 2 weeks old. No one ever told me exactly how old, and flew me back to Tulsa. So I had my first plane ride when I was 2 weeks old, and lived here ever since.
Did you ever try to figure out, go back, who your biological parents were? Never?
No.
It was no interest to you?
No interest. I mean, and I think with most adopted people I've known, there really isn't an interest. It's kind of a TV thing. And I'm sure if you had a bad problem or something like that, it might be looking for any port in a storm kind of situation. But no, it wasn't. I mean, you think about it, John, post-war, conceived 1949, not likely to be a good story, frankly.
Right. Your mother's name?
Florence Lloyd Jones Barnett.
She had a nickname, didn't she?
Bisser.
Why Bisser?
When she was born, Jake Jones, who you have interviewed, Jake and Lloyd Jones, my uncle, was 2 years old, and he couldn't say baby sister. He said Basher. And that warped into Bisser, and that stuck for the rest of her life.
So who was her father?
Richard Lloyd Jones.
And he was the owner, editor of the Tulsa Tribune?
Owner, editor, publisher, yes. He bought it from Charles Page in 1919 and changed the name to the Tulsa Tribune. It was a Tulsa Democrat. Stayed in the family until we had to close it in 1992.
Let's talk about your mother, where she was born and grew up, and her personality. Kind of describe her.
Well, she was born in Madison, Wisconsin. And, of course, the whole family is Wisconsin roots. They all went to University of Wisconsin. You know, both my uncles and my mom, my grandfather, grandmother, everybody went to University of Wisconsin. She moved to Tulsa, of course, in 1919 when her dad bought the Tulsa Tribune. And, went to school here. Graduated from Central High School in 1930. Went on to University of Wisconsin, of course. And then she actually started working in New York, and then came back to Tulsa somewhere in the mid-30s, met my dad. The rest, as they say, is history. She was a very, very, very interesting woman, well-read, well-educated, and just a lot of fun to be around. But she was also she volunteered. She did not work outside the home, but she volunteered in numerous charitable organizations. And I remember when she was inducted into the Tulsa Hall of Fame. I'm not sure, but 98 or something like that. And I did her introduction. It was really very much of a pleasure to be able to do that because she deserved it as much as anybody in Tulsa did.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she gave me the best advice I ever got in my whole life.
And
when I was a senior in high school, or junior high school, I guess, I had got admitted to Rice University, early admissions. I was going to be an engineer, so I liked math and science. Then I met a girl, and she was going to go to Sophie Newcomb in New Orleans, and so I applied and got into Tulane. And then we broke up, and I told my mom I was going to go back to Rice because that's my original. She said, no, go to Tulane, get a diversified education, go to New Orleans.
oh,
And I did, and it certainly changed my personality totally.
really?
So it was a wonderful piece of advice. She was a very wise woman, very wise woman.
Hmm. Then your father's name?
Howard Gentry Barnett, Sr.
And then where did he grow up in his personality?
He grew up in Gregory, Texas, which is a little town about 15 miles outside of Corpus Christi. His dad was a banker. Unfortunately, his parents died young. He was in school at SMU, and he had to leave school, so he never graduated college to take care of his younger sisters. He had 3 sisters. One was a little bit older than him, and the other 2 were like 15 years younger. So he had to do that. Never, like I said, never graduated college. My dad was I described him when he died in a little brief eulogy I did. I mean, a man of the highest integrity I've ever known. I mean, honest to a fault. Of course, he became a banker. Started a bank in 1949 here in Tulsa, Berkside State Bank. Basically ran that until we sold the bank in 1985. Describing his personality is really tough, John. He was not outgoing, and yet he was charming. People really liked being around him, but he really didn't seek out any kind of outward activities. Mm.
I want to go through your family tree.
Oh boy.
Because it's very interesting. It includes, not that you people are not famous, but there is someone here that is known maybe worldwide. So I want to go from that. So let's start with your mother, Florence
Lloyd Jones Barnett.
And why was the Lloyd also applied to females?
Well, the name was originally hyphenated as Lloyd Jones. Okay. And many people in our wide family tree still use the hyphen. But in my part of the tree, they decided to drop the hyphen. But everybody still viewed that as kind of their name. I mean, all the women took Lloyd Jones as their middle names when they got married. So instead of like today, very often a woman with, Jane Smith marries John Doe, she'll become Jane Smith Doe, mm-hmm. and give up whatever her middle name might have been. Not in our family.
So Lloyd Jones was actually the last name.
Was the last name, yes.
Then her father, as we said, was Richard Lloyd Jones, owner of the Tulsa Tribune. All right, then he had sons.
Yes, 2 sons, Jenkins Lloyd Jones and Richard Lloyd Jones.
So Jenkins Lloyd Jones Sr.
Yes.
Had a sister.
My mother. My grandfather's, Richard Lloyd Jones, brother to Frank Lloyd Wright's mother. And they grew up in the same area in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Frank Lloyd Wright and Richard Lloyd Jones were first cousins. Okay, about the same age.
That's because either their mother or father, his father
and Frank's mother were siblings.
We have Frank Lloyd Wright buildings in our state.
Yes.
In our city.
Yes.
West Hope.
West Hope. Richard Lloyd Jones built West Hope.
And Richard Lloyd Jones didn't live there, did he?
Yes, he did.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, he lived there till he died.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Richard Lloyd Jones Sr.
Yes.
Then we have Bartlesville, the Price Tower.
Yes.
I did a little research on this. You probably know that. It comes from Harold C. Price Sr., who was head of the pipeline construction from H.C. Price Company. You're nodding your head, and you knew that. I didn't have to tell you that. And he wanted to develop a headquarters in Bartlesville, so he hired Frank Lloyd Wright to design the headquarters for his company.
Frank's only skyscraper.
Right.
If you can call a 15-story building anymore a skyscraper.
Margaret and I were in Scottsdale several weeks ago, and we saw his winter home there and his working lab, which was, the whole thing was very interesting.
Taliesin West?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. Placed in a nice location. Frank Lloyd Wright died in 1959. You were 9 years old. Were you ever around him or ever see him?
My mother told me that I did meet him, but I did not know. I got to know his last wife, Ogavana. Okay, went out to Taliesin West, where she still literally held court. That was a training ground for young architects. But she would have, formal dinner every night. It was an interesting place.
In West. And were you there too? You visited that place.
I visited, yes. Yeah.
And what a remarkable man. But we're here to talk about you.
It's all right.
But that's interesting, that lineage that you have there.
Well, you didn't mind, just for the record, Richard Lloyd Jones Sr.'s father, Jenkin Lloyd Jones, was a very famous, probably the most famous of all of them from terms of countrywide. He was the first Unitarian minister west of the Appalachian Mountains. Rode on the Hope ship with Henry Ford, and he was a pretty big guy back in the day.
So is the name West Hope tied to your story there?
And unfortunately, I don't know it. It relates back to a place that my grandfather knew in Wisconsin, but I'm not sure exactly what the connection is.
When you were around your tables and eating and dinners and so forth, was there much talk around the table about the Tulsa Tribune and the paper business? Did they talk about that a lot at home?
Not really. It came up, but that was not anywhere near the focus of conversation.
Your education, where'd you go to grade school?
Elliott.
Junior high?
Edison.
And that was through high school then? That was
yes.
Junior high and high together, weren't they?
Full 6 years, yes.
And when did you graduate?
1968.
That was a remarkable year in our nation, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was quite a year.
Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Martin
Luther King
was assassinated.
The crazy Democrat convention in Chicago.
Right. And so you were aware of all that. I don't know if people talked about it in school or not, but and then you went on to where? College after that?
I started at Tulane, did a couple of years there, and then transferred back to the University of Tulsa and graduated University of Tulsa in 1972.
And then further?
Law school, SMU, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, graduated in 75.
Why did you choose law school?
I wish I could give you some really neat story about always wanting to be a lawyer or having seen some, lawyer that impressed me with it. Just, I learned early on in my education that, I liked arguing, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean just in terms of the logic involved. When in school, when the teacher would ask you, who wants an essay test versus a multiple choice, I'm the one kid raising his hand for the essay test, and so I just sort of gravitated to it. I figured out in college that's kind of the way my brain worked.
So then, when you graduated in 75?
Yes.
Then what did you do?
Practice law.
And who were you with?
I was with a small boutique law firm here in Tulsa when I joined it was called Sneed, Lang & Trotter. And by the time I left it, almost 10 years later, it was Sneed, Lang, Adams, and Barnett. And it was a small firm, about 6 lawyers when I joined it, and 26 when I left. So it grew during those wonderful days. You'll remember the 70s and 80s, the boom days of the oil business. And that kind of how the firm was built was on these young entrepreneurial startup oil and gas companies that needed all kinds of legal work.
So you just had fun doing that.
It was a lot of fun. It was a crazy time. Never to be repeated, I hope, because there was a lot of stupid money spent during those years.
You were watching others spend those.
It was great to be on the service side and get paid. I didn't have my capital tied up in it.
When did you meet your wife, Billy? Is that about in here sometime or back?
While I was SMU in 1970. We met in 1973. Yeah.
So you were in the same class?
No, she was in nursing school at Texas Women's University, and there was a mixer with the law school dorm, which I wasn't in, but my friend was running the dorm, so he invited me and the nurses, and we met there.
Billie, Billie. How does that name come about?
Well, her father's name was William, and he kind of wanted a son. All he got was 3 daughters.
And so he was going to name somebody Billy, wasn't he?
That's right.
She's probably had some interesting experiences with that name.
Well, she's Billie Kay, and her mother was Catherine, so they both got in on the first child.
All right. And then you had children?
We do. Adrian and Allison. Adrian's a lawyer. And Allison's a social worker.
Is Adrian here in Tulsa?
Adrian's here in Tulsa, yes.
She went after her father's business. And were you influencing that?
Back in the day, with those crazy oil guys, I was working most late nights. I'd barely get home maybe in time to put them to bed, but rarely in time to eat with them. And so Saturday, I'd take them to the office, and because I'd always go to work on Saturday, and say they'd spend Saturday at the law offices. And then when I moved on to business, they spent the day at the business offices. So I think it's osmosis of anything else.
So then it was Allison's husband who died. And can you tell us the circumstances of that?
It's was July of 2022, rather.
And his name?
Was Matthew Simpson. Matt, we called him Matt. He and my daughter and their 2 children, then 4 and 2, 4 years old and 2 years, had gone to a children's museum. It was on a Sunday morning.
Where?
In Durham, North Carolina, where they lived. And they rode their bikes. They were coming back home after visiting the museum, and the kids were in one of those little trailers that people drag behind the bike, and Allison was the one pulling them. Thank goodness, frankly. They came to a crossing of a major street that had a stoplight, but it wasn't. They were on a trail that had a stoplight for the trail people to be able to cross this major street. And they waited until the green light, and Matt started out ahead of Allison and was hit by a car running the red light, going about 50 miles an hour, and he never regained consciousness. He was in the hospital for about 4 days before he died. One of those kind of tragedies you read about in the paper, but you just never think about affecting your own family.
So the children then were how old? 1 and
4 and 2. And they witnessed it.
Oh my!
And
do they talk about it?
They do. Allison had made it a kind of a real point to keep their father alive in their family. There are pictures of him. They talk about him. She encourages us when we're visiting them, if there's something that comes up that reminds us of a story about Matt, to tell that story. And of course, it's an interesting thing I thought about not too long after the time. If this had happened when we were that age, in early 30s, that there'd be pictures. But for these kids, they've got videos now, so they can see their father interacting with them, and those will become their memories.
Yep.
They won't have real memories. They'll have memories created by the videos.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was tough to handle that, for sure. I saw them I was at your anniversary.
Yes, yeah, they were there.
And they're just beautiful little kids.
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous kids.
They're doing fine.
TSF Communications Corporation. Explain, what is that?
1981 or 1982, January 1982, my uncle, Richard Lloyd Jones, who was president of the Tulsa Tribune, died. And he was kind of the business side of the newspaper. Jenkins Lloyd Jones was the editorial newspaper side, if you will. And there was really no one to take, Richard Lloyd Jones was called Dick, to take Uncle Dick's place. So they asked me, I was a business lawyer, to kind of come join the board and try to help direct. The Tribune was doing very well financially at the time. Those boom times were good for everybody. And I started investing the money with another company called Swab-Fox companies. And they were primarily early in the pipeline business, but they were investing the proceeds of that into other things. Unfortunately, they were real estate and oil and gas, what they were investing in, real estate in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which we all thought was great until the bust came, and then everything crashed. But we'd spent so much money together after about 2 or 3 years, that we finally decided to merge the two companies. We had so much intertwined. So that became Tribune Swab-Fox. And then Tribune Swab-Fox in 1989 spun off a subsidiary, took it public on the American Stock Exchange, called TSF Communications. And so Tribune Swab-Fox still existed, and it owned 63% of TSF Communications, now a public company. And Tribune Swab-Fox is a public company too. So we had two public companies interrelated.
But did you take over at the time when the banks were threatening to pull credit?
Yeah, by 1992, we had gotten, the Gulf War in 91 was devastating because most of the businesses that we'd acquired after putting the companies together were in one way or another related to required advertising revenues to sustain them. As you may remember, one of the effects of the Gulf War was to basically shut down advertising because no one knew what was going to happen. And we had a 45% drop in revenues in 1 year. And we still had a ton of debt left over from that good old Tulsa real estate because it didn't move anywhere. No one was buying it. And we had tens of millions of dollars of debt over there on that. And finally the bank started saying, no mas, you guys aren't going to make it. You're going to do this. We had a lot of value in the assets. We just didn't have the cash flow. So there was a move on to sell the assets, liquidate the company. The board eventually fired the CEO, and I had a team under him that basically worked for me, and we said, give us a chance. And we outlined a plan to bring the company out, and it worked. It wasn't genius. As I told the stockholders at our first meeting the next summer, that I wish I could tell you that we were brilliant in our creativity. All we did was sell stuff that was losing money and pay off debt with the proceeds. I mean, it wasn't like it was brilliant, but it worked anyway, and the company turned around. So,
Well, the shares wasn't at one time pretty low,
they were under $4 a share when I took over as CEO.
And when you sold it, it was how much?
$40.25 a share.
So you did something brilliant, didn't you?
Well, 4 years later, we just did things right. We minded our P's and Q's. We made some acquisitions, made some really timely divestitures during that time. Got some luck like you always do. The economy was good at the time, which always helps. Didn't have to deal with any great disruptions there, so we were able to focus on the company.
But in that time, the paper itself was not doing very well.
Paper was gone by the time I took over as CEO. I took over as CEO in August 1993.
All right. So that was in 92 then.
Yes.
They announced, the Tulsa World announced that it would not renew their agreement.
Right.
Which was what, that agreement?
It was called a joint operating arrangement, which had been entered into originally in 1941 as one of the earliest one of those. They came to sort of proliferate. I mean, there were like 26 or 7 of them at one time. And that's basically a partnership with your competitor, whereby you share a lot of the facility, whether it's building, presses, in our case, circulation, advertising, all that was done jointly. The only thing separate were the newsroom. Each had separate news voice, which was why in 1970 that concept of joint operating agreement was blessed by Congress in an exception to the antitrust laws to try and preserve dual editorial voices in a market.
And so that was preserved here.
It was preserved here until 1992, yeah. Yeah, we were an evening newspaper, and evening newspapers, as you well know, were not exactly doing well. TV was kind of the first shot when you had the evening news going. People get home, turn on the 5:30 news here in our time slot, and that's the time they used to read the paper.
Right. And there are still some of us around who still misses the Tulsa Tribune in our driveway.
Yes, and I still read the paper, and I very often read it at night.
But we wish we were reading the news, Tulsa World, the Tulsa Tribune, because the World and the Tribune did take different stances. One would be considered maybe more liberal, the Tulsa Tribune more conservative. Would that be accurate?
Probably, as those terms apply in Oklahoma. Okay, I mean, being liberal in Oklahoma is not what you call liberal, but
Amen.
But yeah, they took different, and that was
fun.
And that was the whole intent. That again, the congressional action on the antitrust laws preserved different voices.
Yeah.
And I know, talking to people at the Tulsa World after the Tribune shut down, they knew they were not as good a newspaper after that. Didn't have the competitive edge, and that really created, because, at the Tulsa Tribune, the first thing people did in the morning when they got to work at, like 5:30 or 6 in the morning with the early crowd, was tear the Tulsa World apart, and find a story, and then if there's a good story, let's find a new angle on it. We got to get a different angle.
The World paid the Tribune about $30 million for its share.
Yeah, over time, yes, over time. And that was a little bit more than what would have been expected for the cash flow over the remaining period of the contract, which basically what happened, they didn't really buy us out. We'd all agreed to cancel our joint operating agreement early. So, I mean, theoretically, the next day we could have opened a newspaper.
Okay. If you had somebody to print it with.
We had things like presses.
If you had Eli Whitney around.
But I mean, we knew, we could theoretically start a newspaper, but that was obviously not in the cards.
No, but we should say that Jenkins Lloyd Sr. was a publisher. He was an editor. He was a writer. He was known beyond Tulsa.
Yes, very much so.
His travels. He was carried in other newspapers. So that's what the Tulsa Tribune had, and the Tulsa World didn't have that kind of leadership from the top. They had business type. I'm saying that to see whether you agree with me or not.
I would agree with that, and again, I think it's the reason my Uncle Jenkins Lloyd Jones, did all those things is that was his personal proclivity. He was a writer. He thought he had something to say. He wanted to say it out there, and he, signed on to get syndicated, did all this stuff. And he was actually president of the United States Chamber of Commerce for 1 year, and so he was well known around the country.
Yep.
And the Tulsa World didn't have that kind of people.
No. The last edition of the Tulsa Tribune was September 30th, 1992, and I can very proudly say that I broadcast my show from the Tulsa World Tribune.
Yes, you did.
And he was there to visit with us.
Yes.
And I still have that interview.
Yes.
Yeah, much to be admired, for sure.
No, they did both he and Jenk Jones Jr. did a really great job of allowing the Tribune to go out with dignity, making the employees feel that they had, done something important and worthwhile, even though we were shutting down.
Mm-hmm. I should bring up my friend Jim East, who passed away last year.
Yes.
And he worked for the Tribune.
Yes, he did.
And he became an editorial writer as well.
Yes.
And enjoyed that time very much at the Tribune.
Oh, and Jim was a great guy, and he and I were really pretty good friends. I would very often go down to the newsroom and just pop into his office, and we'd just sit there and talk about world affairs, local, national, international, till somebody would come in and say, "Aren't you going to go to work today, East or something?"
Right. Right. Well, unfortunately, he died last year at an early age in his 60s. But it's interesting, I had interviewed him about 2 months before that.
Oh, wow.
And so I have his interview on voicesofoklahoma.com.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So then you move on in your life, Director of Business Development, the Official Information Company. What is that all about?
We sold TSF Communications in October of 1997, and the company that we actually was a buyout firm out of New York City that bought us, private equity firm, and they formed another company called the Official Information Company to hold the assets of TSF Communications that they bought. So, at closing, I was given, wasn't asked as part of the deal, a 1-year consulting agreement with them, and we all thought that was going to be one of those consulting agreements that the ex-CEO gets to basically push him off to the side and go home and don't worry about it. No, they put me to work, and I did acquisitions for them and new product development for a year. Mm-hmm.
What does that mean, acquisition and new product? Like, for example?
Well, we bought a company in Germany, we bought a company in England, and we bought a couple of companies here in the United States that all related to what TSF Communications had before, were add-ons or complementary, theoretically synergistic. I've never really seen a good synergy, but everybody still wants them.
So then who was the owner then of the company?
Well, it was a private equity firm called Verona Suler Partners out of New York.
Okay. But then something else happens to you beyond that. I think we got 1998.
98, yes.
Tell us what happens.
Well, I'd finished my consulting agreement, and just a few months before that, Ken Lackey, who was chief of staff for Frank Keating, the governor of Oklahoma, called and basically asked me what I was doing, and I told him I was about ready to finish up that deal, and he said, "Well, Howard, you got some money in your pocket now. You sold your company. It's time for a little public service here." So he asked me to come down and meet with Frank and talk through what opportunities there might be.
You're talking about Governor Frank Keating.
Governor Frank Keating, yeah. Eventually I ended up with running the Department of Commerce as his director, and then was on Frank's cabinet as his Secretary of Commerce. Mm-hmm.
Talk us a little bit about what you actually did. What does Secretary of Commerce do?
Well, that's Oklahoma's statewide economic development arm. And on a day-to-day basis, it basically just means, working with existing companies to help them when they need help with mostly state money that might be available, helping them with grants, helping them do that. We had a group that worked with the federal side to help them with money. But then when you talk about what the governor wants the Department of Commerce, it's all about getting companies in from out of state. And in Frank's case, that was a big, big deal. But he also focused on helping companies. And one thing he did that no one else had ever done is we had a weekly breakfast with CEOs of companies in Oklahoma already and listened to what they had to say and what they wanted to do. But we also did a lot of traveling. We went to California and New York, several international trips, all focused around trying to get companies interested in coming to Oklahoma. We planted a lot of seeds. For instance, Tulsa BizJet here, which is a Lufthansa-owned entity. We met with Lufthansa 3 or 4 times. I met once with Mayor Susan Savage. She was over there trying to get them because they were interested in that. Then I met with them with Governor Frank Keating. And then about a year later, that happened. We also got a company, I don't remember the name, out of Taiwan that came. I remember the international ones because that was the big deal. They went to Claremore. I forget what their name is, but it's a long process. Rarely do you just go over there, sign a deal, and come back.
Right. Well, that must have been interesting and fun for you if you could help existing companies in Oklahoma seek funding and all that. That must have been enjoyable.
It was fun. Department of Commerce, at the time at least, managed the statewide CDBG funds, the Community Block Grant funds, that larger cities like Tulsa and Oklahoma City, they get it directly from the feds. But then for smaller cities, the Fed just gives a lump sum to the state, and then it's up to the state to dole it out to the smaller towns. So I spent a lot of time going to small town Oklahoma, talking about what they need to do to qualify to get those funds. And that was interesting because, I'd been around Oklahoma, but not at that level and not that often and not that deep. And so it was really an interesting time.
I'm sure it was. But then you resigned.
Well, I didn't resign. I got bumped upstairs. No.
The governor appointed you for something else.
Yes. Ken Lackey, as it turned out, he admitted to me later, when he asked me to come down there, was not just seeking someone to run the Department of Commerce, but looking for a successor.
You didn't know you were being auditioned, did
right.
you?
He was tired of government, and as all business guys tend to after a while. He wanted to come back to Tulsa, so he resigned in July, and the governor appointed me July of 1999, and the governor then appointed me as his chief of staff. We got to know each other on some travels and that sort of thing. I'd known Frank most of my life, but we never were really close. I was closer with his wife because
Kathy.
I was in kindergarten through high school.
Yeah. So that was 1999 to 2003, I think.
Yeah,
You were
right
with him.
to the end. I was Frank's third chief of staff, and when he offered me the job, he basically said 2 things. One, I had to agree to stay to the end of the term. He didn't want to change chiefs again. And then 2, you are the only person that could tell me no.
Did you?
Yes.
Did he listen to you?
Yes, he did.
There were
only a couple of times. What? We want a story on that?
Yes.
We were scheduled to go to China to, one of these, trips to look at companies trying to get an investment back in Oklahoma. And on our way to China, Frank had an offer and was going to make a speech in Seattle. And so we flew the state plane to Seattle, and obviously we were going to take a big plane to China. Frank did something to his back the day we were leaving. And by the time we got there, that speech, he was in horrible pain. He gave the speech basically hunched over the lectern, holding himself up with that. And then he came off, and I said, Governor, we're going back to Oklahoma. He goes, no, we have to go to China. There are people over there waiting for us, because there was a big contingent of Oklahomans that had gone before us. We were meeting them. I said, no, Governor, we are not. You are going back to Tulsa, or back to Oklahoma City. And we turned the state plane around. We went back to Oklahoma City, and both the doctors, and in particular Kathy, said, thank you for bringing us. I don't know what we'd done in China with that.
Yeah. Did he have surgery or anything to fix it? Or how?
No, but he did have a lot of therapy.
So was that China trip ever made again?
It was again, yes, a couple of years later.
So then you were responsible for different issues, I suppose, state policy and working with the legislature.
As chief then, and under Frank Keating as chief, and it's different for each governor how they want to use their chief. But in my case, basically, all things that related to the government reported ultimately to me. Obviously to the governor, but I was his surrogate in that regard. So whether it was meetings with the legislature, meeting with tribes, policy initiatives, budget issues, all those eventually found their way to my office.
At that time, the Democrats were still in control of the legislature.
Yes.
So, and since Frank is a Republican, did you have challenges because of that?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that they did control the legislature, which meant that anything we wanted to get done, they had to concur. The no part is that we had enough Republicans to sustain a veto. Frank had 305 vetoes, all sustained, which are like, before I got there were like 200 and some odd. And they'd finally gotten the attention of the leadership in the legislature that understood that if you wanted to get something done that you wanted to get done, you had to come to us, and vice versa.
Because he'd veto whatever.
Yeah, he'd veto it if it was something he didn't like. And so that manifested itself primarily in budget issues. Before Frank, governors were often, George and I remember talking to him. His last year, he didn't even submit a budget. He was so disgusted because the legislature would just throw it out. Okay. And so it was really an interesting time because you had Frank, in one sense, was probably the most powerful governor we've had because he had the ability to get something done because he had the ability to bargain with the legislature and hold them to it. He had something they wanted, which was to get whatever they wanted passed. And he had the veto pen. So it was a very, very interesting time in that regard. And Frank was never demanded a lot of legislation. We usually had a fairly straightforward policy issue. His big deal was income taxes. So we often got, a quarter point or a half point cut off income taxes in exchange for spending some money on something they wanted to spend the money on.
It seems like I recall education was a big initiative for him, and he felt that we were in the lower tier. We still are, I think, but that was of concern to him.
Remember 4x4?
4x4. Tell us about that.
That basically what Frank big deal became is wanted to graduate high school, you had to have 4 years of math, 4 years of English, 4 years of science, and 4 years of social study. At the time, we only had 2 years of math required, believe it or not. And there was 4 years of English. That's the only one of those 4 that did have the 4. We got the third year of math required. During that, we got 3 years of science required. Never got the fourth year. But that was his big deal because it wasn't just that we were falling behind in terms of support for education, which we always have been, but we just weren't doing a very good job with what we had. So that was a very, very big initiative.
Well, in defense of those of us who are math challenged, I would probably have a hard time getting through 4 years of math. And I don't know if that was ever taken into consideration or not, but there'd be a lot of kids might have been left behind.
That's why also they tried to couple it with a lot of remediation. That you had to have remediation to make it work.
Yeah. Right to work was big for Frank.
Right to work was very big for Frank. 2001, you remember the saga that Frank had been pushing that for every year. It was always a treat to go to his State of the State because the union would all come into the gallery and just sit there and wait for Frank finally mentioned right to work. Moo, the whole place. It was almost a ritual. But he finally got the legislature pushed into a corner. You may remember Mary Fallon, the lieutenant governor, took over to control the Senate. Finally, Stratton Taylor, the leader of the Senate, agreed to allow a vote. Because, of course, the Democrats the unions didn't want right to work.
Right.
That was one of their constituencies.
Right to work meaning you didn't have to belong to a union.
to work.
To work, right.
So anyway, we finally had the vote on September 25th of 2001. You remember what happened just a little bit before that? September 11th, 2001? The World Trade Center got bombed, got wiped out by planes.
Yes.
That really threw an interesting wrinkle into that contest because, I mean, basically, Frank and I were meeting, we were having breakfast with the guy who was running the campaign, and I got a call from Billy, and she said, "Are you guys in front of a TV?" I said, "No, you go to the TV." It was about 8:15 in the morning. And when we got the TV in time to see the second plane go in, because we were meeting with our campaign manager, and so we immediately
campaign for
right to work.
Yeah.
So we immediately canceled all of our ads. And bluntly, John, labor, which they were running nationally, they didn't. We felt like that was a big mistake for them because they were running, because their ads, you may or may not remember, were pretty vicious about how, Oklahoma's going to basically be a wasteland and, all this kind of stuff if we did it. And then our first ad went back up that next Sunday night, and it was basically just Frank talking, saying, we have an opportunity in Oklahoma to show the terrorists something. It's called democracy. We're the first vote to happen after 9/11. So whether you're going to vote for or against, and you know where I stand, I'm for it, please go vote. Show the terrorists that we care in Oklahoma.
And it worked.
And it passed.
Wow.
Polls flipped. We were down by 10 points. We won by 7 or 8 points. John, one of the more interesting things of Chief of Staff was tribal negotiations.
Okay.
That was always, you may or may not remember the water compact. We were going to sell water to Texas.
Yes.
Okay. Evil people selling water to Texas.
Right.
In southeast Oklahoma, there are basically 6 river basins that all empty into the Red River. Red River is salinated as it goes through the salt plains out west, renders the water essentially non-drinkable. You can use it for some purposes, agriculture and whatever, but not for drinking. And, we've done hydrology surveys that show that you could drop a city the size of Chicago into southeast Oklahoma and still have water to burn. Okay? A lot of water. But that's also the Choctaw and Chickasaw nations, now reservations, thanks to McGirt. So we had to negotiate with the tribes before we could negotiate with Texas. Well, it took us 2 months to get the deal cut with the tribes. And that was the toughest negotiations I've ever been in my life, bar none. But we did get a deal done. But we had to do it in private. Tribes are not transparent, not public. Well, people knew what we were doing. By the time we got down there, the opposition had already gotten organized, and basically, selling water to Texas was akin to killing babies on the south steps of the Capitol. So it was really too bad, because that would have been literally billions of dollars that could have gone into the poorest part of our state in southeast Oklahoma.
So were we afraid we were going to run out of water, or what was the opposition?
Oh, yeah. That started out that way. We had all kinds of studies that showed that was ridiculous. And people say, there are people down here who don't have any running water in their house. Well, that's not a water problem. That's an infrastructure problem, okay? And it was just, water, as I learned, is just a very personal, contentious issue. And then, of course, selling water to Texas, didn't help. I was like Academy Town Hall we had on water a couple of years later, and I chaired it, and I told the people that we started out, I said, we're going to talk about selling water to Kansas. Okay. Let's take Texas out of this equation.
Right. Yeah. 'Cause we do not like Texas. Right. So when you talked about it, negotiating, was that you? Or did you were negotiating with the tribes?
Yes.
To do that.
Yes.
You and representatives from those 2 tribes.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes it was just 3 of us. Sometimes myself and the 2 chiefs on particularly thorny issues. like sovereignty,
Yeah.
anything, because the one of the biggest problem in a lot of those compacts is verification, and the tribes rightly